So welcome everyone to this wonderful event tonight, Avebury Collaborative Artists Book Launch. We're very excited to have you. My name is Kate Gibson. I am the manager of the Sprucer branch of the Edmonton Public Library. Also, sorry, I was like, what else do I do? I also sort of supervise Capital City Press, which is Edmonton Public Library's way of supporting and promoting local writers. So that's why I'm here tonight. I'm very excited to kick this off. Before we begin, though, I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather, and which I am currently on right now, is Treaty 6 territory, and a traditional meeting ground, traveling route, and home for many Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. So right now I am going to introduce our two speakers tonight and get this started. So Brianna Tosswill is an artist who expresses herself and others in print and book format under the Imprint Penrose Press. She explores the limits and unique opportunities of lino-cut via letterpress printmaking in her work and is preoccupied with geometry and mathematics. She obtained her BFA in printmaking with distinction from OCAD University in 2017. She became an active artist and community member, first at Open Studio in Toronto, and then through an emerging artist residency at Snap Print Shop in Edmonton. Wendy McGrath is a Métis writer and artist living in Amiskwichi, Waskahikan, so-called Edmonton, and Treaty 6 territory. She has published 4 novels and 2 books of poetry. Wendy works in multiple genres: fiction, poetry, creative nonfiction, and spoken word. Her most recent book, Broke City, is the final novel in her Prairie Gothic Santa Rosa trilogy. This acclaimed trilogy chronicles the struggles of a working-class family and is told through the eyes of a child narrator. Wendy has collaborated with musicians, printmakers, and her most recent collaboration is with Brianna Tosswill. Avebury is an artist book which Brianna has created, designed, and produced, and features Wendy's poetry, and it's what we're here to celebrate tonight. So without further ado, I am going to stop talking and hand it over to Wendy and Brianna.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks to the Edmonton Public Library, Capital City Press, and thanks to everyone here tonight who's joined Brianna and I for this launch. I'm very excited to be part of this collaborative artists book. And I guess before we kind of kick things off, Brianna, could you just give us a definition of what an artist book is?
Absolutely. I'm actually going to start sharing my screen here. There we go. Okay, so this is my favorite definition of an artist book by Faith Hale. It is: an artist book is anything an artist tells you is a book, which I feel like is an excellent and open-ended definition. The artist books that I make are often in collaboration with writers, because I dabble, but I'm not really a writer. And they are often, what I do is I take something in the text and I try to physically embody it. And sometimes that's through illustrations and sometimes that's through structure. I'm going to go into some examples a little bit later, but yeah, this is a good place to start. Wendy, did you have another question or something?
Well, what drew you to create artist book with your imprint?
Absolutely. So I have always been a reader, always, since I was a child, and I took my weekly trip to the library to pick out 10 books. Basically as many as I could carry. And I had this affinity for art since, again, from a very young age. And by studying printmaking, first at Beale High School in London, Ontario, and then at OCAD University, I saw a way that I could combine word and image, and that I could contribute to the feeling that you get when you're reading, like the positive feeling that we associate with books, in a way that was not just by writing or not just by illustrating, but in a way that was a cohesive model of all of these good things.
So in a sense, the book becomes a metaphor of itself and of the work that you're embodying in a sense.
Yeah, we're working with a lot of metaphors in this project, but definitely.
Now, you started your own imprint, Penrose Press, and you mentioned there is a mathematical connection there. When did you start this venture, and what's the Penrose Press ethos?
So so I started Penrose Press about 4 years ago, and it was right out of university. I had a collaborative project with somebody I met in a creative writing elective that I was taking in my final year, and I had the concept for like one tiny detail that ended up fueling like everything that I've done since then. It was actually, I'm gonna skip forward a little bit. It's actually this book. It's called Caterpillar Portraits, and it's written by Joyce Jody Kim. And Joyce had shared this excerpt with our class about a librarian who notices that these books are being repaired. Like these books that had been like missing half of a cover, or the pages had been falling out, had been borrowed by somebody and then like painstakingly put back together, and like illustrations fixed and all of these things, and returned to the library without any seeking any recognition, or they were just doing a community good deed. So this is the chapter that Joyce shared with us, and I was like, if I was to make that into a book, I would tear all of the covers and put them back together again. And that idea was so compelling that we went ahead and we made the book. And then I've made maybe 12 or more books since then, in this similar kind of creative vein. And Penrose Press's ethos has always been to share books in a way that you don't usually get to. That there are fine art books that exist, but also so many of them are difficult to get your hands on, surprisingly, because books are meant to be held. And I just think that art that you can hold in your hand is one of the most powerful kinds of art, and also that it should be affordable and accessible and made not only by people who have a minimum number of years of experience or a minimum number of qualifications. I just think that anybody anywhere can make good art, and it's been a ride.
Well, and just to pick up on your point about accessibility for artist books,
Mm-hmm.
the U of A has the Bruce Peel collection, but again, you have to make an appointment. And first you have to know that the books are actually there. So to your point, I think what you've done since you've started Penrose Press is indeed make artists' books more accessible, and that tactile experience of touching paper, of holding the book up to your nose so you can smell the ink. There's just nothing like that.
Yes, my books unfortunately don't smell like old and musty, but they do smell like oil-based ink.
Yeah, like ink. That's what I'm getting at. Yeah, the ink. There's that smell even when you walk into a
Print shop.
Print shop that is just makes your heart leap. So it's that same kind of inky smell that you get when you pick up one of Penrose Press's books.
Yeah,
it's
I'm very interested in both recycling materials and using unorthodox materials. We'll talk about Avebury a little bit more in detail, and it has like a strong recycled element. But also this scroll that I made, If a Carp Dreams of the Milky Way by Jasmine Gui, is I have this photo here of this tomato plant stand, which may seem very incongruous, but I was looking for a material to support the top of the scroll, a material that I had very specifically envisioned because I had seen, like I had done some research and I was like, this is what a scroll looks like. And I knew that it had to be a tube. I knew that it had to be hollow. And I knew that it had to be strong. And I had to be able to cut it to length. And I could not find anything at any hardware stores or craft supply stores or anything. I ended up wandering and browsing around the dollar store, and I was able to find these tomato plant stands. And the rod is metal and hollow. It was exactly what I needed. And I talked to my dad, who's very, very handy. And I was like, how do I cut this? And he's like, you can get a miniature pipe cutter. So a lot of my practice is having an idea, a very clear idea of how I need to execute something, and then acquiring the skills required to actually do it. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Kind of like writing in a way, you have an idea and it's just
and then you need to do all the research.
Yeah, you have to do all the research and bring all the pieces together to create your finished piece. So there are a lot of similarities, I think. And also in printmaking, there's a layered quality and a layered process to thinking about it. And I think that's often the case in writing as well. You think about, collage, things against each other. You think about weaving things together. You think about layers of meaning and layers of thought and the psychology of your characters. So I think there's a lot of similarities between writing and printmaking.
Absolutely. It also makes me think of, in print, if you're making a book, kind of a conventional book, I don't make very many of those, you have to print all of the text first, and then you print any of the images, and then you can bind it. And so you have to do these things in order. You can't print a little bit of text and a little bit of images and then bind part of it and then print some more. You can't go back. You have to do all of the steps completely and then move on to the next step, which is a lot like writing, where you have to do your plot outline and then you have to do your first draft, and you don't finish your first paragraph or your first chapter before you've written the rough draft of your last chapter. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah. And I mean, I've done a lot of collaborations with artists and musicians, and each collaboration informs my work in different ways. And certainly, after I had sent you my poems, I looked at them a little differently once I saw the way and thought about how you were seeing the poems. I've done collaborations. Thank you for pulling up these images, Brianna. No, I've done collaborations with musicians before we knew, with Sasha Lee Brand, and that is based on a suite of poems that I wrote, and Sasha set them to music and produced them, and I did the voiceover and vocals. Before that, I did another spoken word project called Box with Quarto and Sound. And then my last book of poetry, A Revision of Forward, is actually the finished product of a 12-year collaboration with Walter Jewell, who is a printmaker here in Edmonton. And it began as him giving me prints, and I responded to them with poems, and his prints were huge and my poems were really small. And over the 12-year period, it gradually kind of changed where my poems got longer and his prints became more condensed as he responded to my poems. So it was a lengthy collaboration, which taught me a lot about patience, but it was really interesting because not only do you see how your own work, your own writing changes, but you get to see how an artist's practice evolves and be part of their response to your work. So it's very gratifying because writing is such a solitary activity when you've got someone else to be involved in a project. I personally find it really inspiring. And I found our collaboration certainly inspiring, Brianna.
Oh, definitely. Likewise. It's funny that you mentioned patience in collaboration. I do think that's kind of a strong element of it. I guess you know this, but most people don't, that, we had our first sort of meeting and conversation and suggestion of collaboration almost a whole year ago.
Yep.
It was in the summer of 2020. And so we sort of emailed back and forth, kind of like slow and steady. You were like, what about this poem? And I was like, if it already has sound, maybe images are too many things. And we settled on a couple of poems, and I was like, I can do something with this. And then I emailed you like a month or two later, and I was like, okay, I've had the idea. And then the actual production has only been the last 3 weeks to a month. It's been very, very quick. Like there's a lot of planning and a lot of back and forth, and then it happened.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can be interesting waiting for the pieces to come together, especially when you're the person who is not in control of when the next step happens.
Well, for me, I kind of like that element of surprise. I don't have a problem when I share my work with a collaborator. I'm pretty open to what their interpretation might be. So I think as a writer, you have to be able and very willing to let go. Mm-hmm. And the interpretation that a musician or an artist might have about your work might not be what you initially thought it might be, but that's part of the surprise, and that's part of the joy of working together. When I sent you, I as you mentioned before, I sent you a few poems, and when I sent you the 3 that ultimately ended up being in Avebury, I was really interested in how you made them connect. I mean, I could see the connection, but how visually you made them connect, I thought was quite amazing. So yeah, I'm hoping that you'll be able to talk a little bit more about that.
Definitely. You were going to share a reading. Did you want to go ahead with that?
You bet. So right. my part in our collaboration is 3 poems: Avebury Cemetery, Obits, and Obits 2 years later. So the first poem, Avebury Cemetery, just to give you a bit of a setup, Avebury Cemetery is a small, overgrown cemetery in Saskatchewan, truly in the middle of nowhere, and it's slowly being taken back into the ground. It's being reclaimed by the sky and the land, and my settler grandparents are buried there. Once when I was younger, my mother, my aunt, my cousins, my siblings, we all went to the cemetery so that my mom and my aunt could tend it. And at the time, of course, you realize you're visiting your ancestors' graves, but when you're younger, you don't really grasp the significance of those visits. But as you get older, you wonder who will be around to remember you when you're gone. And so this idea really hit home for me when I read an article about a woman in China who was tending graves, cleaning up around some graves, and she felt a stabbing pain in her eye. And I immediately made the connection between this event across an ocean and my visit long ago to Avebury Cemetery. And that was the nugget for this poem. Avebury Cemetery. Our mother mourned the dead and their overgrown plots, bemoaned no one cared the cemetery had gone wild, believed this disorder was divine disgrace. She pulled weeds, cursed gopher holes, and mowed around pillow stones and grass markers and ledgers as we ran between the graves. She made us stop, pointed out names of great-grandparents, letters, and dates now dissolving, lichen-coated and lime-eaten. My mother cried. I swallowed hard. I read of a woman across an ocean, weeding graves, who'd felt a sting in her eye, thought it only flecks of dust, the wind breathing the sighs, signs of ancestors as she pulled weeds and dead flowers from around graves. But her pain would not be silenced. And when the doctor looked under the lid of her eye, he gently pulled away 4 live bees, the kind that are keen for salt. They were drinking her tears, swallowing her grief. And those are gorgeous accompaniments, Brianna.
Thank you. I'm gonna talk about these more later. We're gonna let you finish your readings though.
You bet. Okay. So the second poem that I contributed to this book is called Obits. And it's a found redacted poem from the Edmonton Journal obituary section from September 29th, 2018. So I deliberately went out that day and bought an actual newspaper so I could do this exercise, do this redacted poem. And simple event, going out to get the newspaper. I don't know I can't even tell you the last time that I actually bought a newspaper prior to that, because I just wanted to write this poem that day. So off I went. And from that obituary section came the found redacted poem, Obits. It is with great sadness and heavy hearts that we announce the sudden passing. It is with great sadness that we announce the passing of our mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. Forever remembered for her shortbread, he is remembered. He was a sign painter. He turned to neon, left to cherish his memory in lieu of flowers. This hard-working adventurer left home with a few dollars in her pocket and hopped a train. Mother, grandmother, green thumb extraordinaire, it is with saddened hearts. A hunting accident. Lift a glass of scotch. It is with great sadness. Known for a sense of humor. Alzheimer's Society. Passed away peacefully surrounded by her loving family. Passed away peacefully in her home. She left the farm to work as a waitress. An inquisitive and determined force, an avid reader. Spirit. It is with great sadness that we announce the passing, a brief but fierce battle. Avid bird watcher and musician, peacefully passed. Passed away peacefully. Worked at Swift's Canadian packing plant and Canada Packers. Passed away peacefully after a short illness. Moved to Edmonton to work at Canada Packers. Bingo! Went to his eternal home in heaven. With great sadness, with heavy hearts, sorrow. Time to go home. The third poem in Avebury is Obits 2 years later. So this is a found redacted poem from the Edmonton Journal obituary from September 29th, 2020. And again, I ventured out on that very same day. Everything had changed. I was wearing a mask. My hands were sanitized. It was apocalyptic. And I think we can all agree that much has changed in the last year. A lot had changed in those 2 years. And I wanted to see how a found redacted poem from the same newspaper, from the same day, would evolve. And so this is Obits 2 years later. Passed away at 101, sadly missed children. Private memorial interment at later date. Officers and members to remember. Announced passing on 90th birthday. Master locksmith, magician, entertainer, ski instructor, sang "O Canada," COVID-19 restrictions. Private service, invited guests only. View streamed. Plumbers and pipe fitters remember. Sad effects of aging. Into eternity in an old-time waltz. Loyal military wife. Hard worker, spotless homes. Hot meals on the table. Jobs dry cleaning to sewing draperies. Loved baking, sewing, crossword puzzles, Legion dances. Lawrence Welk won a car. Loved to travel and enjoy cruises, bus tours, road trips far and wide. Loved family, tried to teach them manners and behavior on bases of soldiers. Sorely missed. Private family service. Passed away at 93 years. Follow AHS COVID guidelines. Masks mandatory. Bring own. Restrictions. 100 people. So one of the many things that struck me was how obviously how the world had changed, but also how the obituary section reflected life for the living and how that had changed. And that interested me. So with the found redacted poem, especially, taken from a daily newspaper, it is a slice of what we're all experiencing. And that's what I was trying to capture with Obits and Obits 2 years later.
It's really amazing to hear them out loud for the first time. I was struck by how funny the first one was. I mean, I don't know if it's exactly appropriate to say that a poem about obituaries is funny, but I guess especially the, what's the line? There's one word.
Bingo.
Bingo.
Yeah. Well, and I do hope that the first one comes across as funny. I mean, I'm not suggesting death is funny. But I think that as humans, if we cannot find humor at times of tragedy, we're lost. And I think I know many people who have gone to funerals and just had this overwhelming desire to burst out laughing, or at times when you feel like you should be crying, you have this urge to laugh. It's this kind of weird response, instinctive response that you can't really fight, but yet it happens. So I'm glad that you thought that you should be laughing for the first one.
Yes, definitely. Oh my goodness. Yeah. It also struck me how, people are talking about, I mean, there's the obvious stuff. There's the masks and the restrictions, but there's also like the slightly subtler allusions to everything that we're thinking about during the pandemic, like love to travel or kept a clean house.
Yeah.
I just think
yeah, and those are the things that stand out. It's a really interesting exercise to create a redacted poem. You're taking away, and again, in some ways it's kind of like a lino cut.
It
right?
is.
Where you're taking away
the way to make marks is to remove something, not to add something.
So
Redacted.
again, it's a really interesting metaphor, the process of creating a redacted poem is very much like working with a block of lino.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I can show the lino parts of the project if that's a helpful direction to go in.
Yes,
All
love
right.
to see it.
So I've kind of put these in order of how you encounter the elements as you read, as you open and go through the book. Of course, it's not like, it doesn't have a spine. It doesn't hinge. It's not in bookbinding, we call this the codex. We call that codex. This is not a codex. This is a box with booklets in it. And so this lid here, the wood. I remember talking to Wendy about this, and I was like, Wendy, this project is going to be tricky because I need to get so many pieces of wood, and hobby stores don't even carry that many. Like, I will have to go around to lots of different hobby stores, and I'll have to figure this out, and it's probably going to be expensive. And anyways, of course, I mentioned this to my parents. My dad is an electrician, and he is just like, he can build almost anything, or sometimes he says he can fix anything so it'll stay fixed for a day or a month. He knows that sometimes the fixes are not permanent, but he can pretty much fix anything temporarily. And I value his insight on some things. Like, he as a builder or as a handyman, he sometimes has ideas that don't occur to me as an artist, but I find really valid and interesting. Anyways, so I was asking him, I'm like, where am I going to get some 1/8 inch or 16th inch wood panels? And he's like, yeah, they'd be really hard to find. And also, we've been going through a little bit of a lumber shortage, or lumber prices are weird and everything's different. And he's like, yeah, you don't usually find it that thin at hardware stores. He's like, I got some a few years ago and sitting in the garage. I don't know if I have enough. So there's a little bit of wood that he got just because he thought it was interesting and unique. And he's like, I might have a purpose for this. And a little bit of the wood is from wood paneling, like 1970s, like bad wood paneling. But this is the back. What you can see right now is the back of the wood paneling. So the other side is not very pretty, but you don't see it in the book because there's like a velvet mat board attached to the inside of the, you can just kind of see it peeking behind the booklets. So you don't see the side that faced out in the original design of the plywood. You only see the back of it, which I find much more aesthetically pleasing. So this is kind of the same thing as the tomato plant stands. It's all about repurposing things that you wouldn't expect into artwork. I was actually joking with somebody in the studio yesterday. I work out of Snap, so sometimes there's people there and it's my only socialization. And I was telling her that the wood's recycled and the mat board is salvaged from offcuts at frame shop, and the newspaper like booklets are printed on newsprint, which means by mass the book is like 90% recycling. Or yes, I said garbage, but I'm gonna take that back. I'm gonna say recycling. And I just think that it's pretty fun. Yeah, my dad was saying that like the wood's nice, but and the image is okay, and then like you put the image on the wood and you're like, oh my gosh, look what that does. Wendy,
yeah, it's finding the beauty in found materials. Mm-hmm. And again, I allude to the redacted found poem. You're trying to find something beautiful and funny and sad and poignant, mm-hmm. in the obituaries. Yeah. And so that emotion comes across to readers, and certainly the emotion comes across to someone who experiences the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope so.
You know, you mentioned as well that you going back to your dad and recycled materials.
I was telling Wendy this story a couple days ago when we were planning this event. This story is like, it's kind of this thing that I reflect back on when I think about what I make and how I make it and why I make it. When I was 7, my dad built a bed for me. It was like, when I was 7. So maybe my little sister was moving out of her crib and into like a twin size bed or something. And so I was being bumped. So he made me a bed to move into. And the bed is this gorgeous blonde wood 4-poster that's about the same height that I am now. So like it's just under 6 feet tall. And it has, you know, this beautiful turned headboard. And it's important to note that he built the lathe that he used to turn the posts. Just, my dad's crazy. And the most interesting thing is that the posts are built from salvaged industrial, not crates, shipping
Pallets.
Yeah. They're built from recycled industrial shipping pallets because he used to work at GE. And so I have this beautiful thing, and it's like, it's my bed. It's the bed that I sleep on here in Edmonton. I have slept on it my entire life, except for like a few years while I was living in student housing. And it's just amazing to me that what you need to make something really beautiful that lasts, resonates with somebody is just a lot of care and some resourcefulness, but not the most expensive materials. I never buy the most expensive materials for my books. I really think that, you know, like there are people who make beautiful books that have like leather covers with gold tooling, and they're lovely. They're not the kind of books that I need to make. I need to make this kind of book.
Yeah, just the way that you have interpreted the poetry, the way that you have interpreted the emotion, and you've never even been to Avebury Cemetery, and
I've been calling it Avebury this whole time in my head.
That's okay. Well, that's okay. I mean, you've picked up on the blue of the sky, the yellow of the wheat fields, and it's all been organic as you've worked through this. I mean, when I picture the cemetery, it's, as I said, it's been reclaimed by the land, but in the summer, the wheat fields and the canola fields in Saskatchewan are yellow. And then the clear blue sky of the prairies, those two things in my mind were weighing down on the cemetery. No one is tending it anymore. So the sky, the earth, the grass is all going to envelop it. And I think that you've captured that sensibility very well with the lino cuts.
Yeah. Oh, so these are lino cuts for anybody who is unfamiliar with my work or with printmaking. On this page, there are 2 reduction lino cuts. So the first one printed is the blue sky. And so in lino cut, what prints, the image that you get is everything you don't carve. So I carved away where the clouds are and where the little bit of lichen on the gravestone is. And I carved away where I wanted the flowers to sit in the blue and the black. And so I printed all of the blue, and then I carved away most of the blue just where the black is and printed again in exactly the same spot. And with the other one, it's a very subtle yellow roller blend, and then it's pretty green actually, but the way that the light was hitting it is making it very yellow. I guess it's sort of like a word, a yellowy green. There's a word, chartreuse. I found it. So these elements were always meant to overlap each other. And so you have the first paragraph of the poem. Wendy, what word would you use to describe the first bit?
Just the first stanza. It sets up, it posits the reader in a sense of place,
Mm-hmm.
very much grounded. And then as the poem progresses, the reader's taken across an ocean and back again to what their own experience might be with grief or with dying that they've had in their lives.
Yeah. And part of how I've done this is that the overgrowth, can you see my cursor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, am I pointing or is this not doing anything? The overgrowth in the yellow section is on a separate page. So as you open the book, the overgrowth is removed. So when you're reading the last three stanzas, you're seeing the grave in more like pristine condition, which could be read as going back in time, or it could be read as, you know, the person who's tending the grave is really tending it.
So how much, just for the casual observer, how much time do you spend developing each print? And I would say like the lino cut as well as the type.
I spend a lot of time with the idea, like sketching, but also just like continuing to mull it over in my head. I think that actually takes the most time in any of my projects. I decide color palettes and things way in advance. And then by the time I sit down to do the work, it's mostly figured out. I know there's a lot of artists who like to figure things out as they're working, but that hasn't ever really worked for me. So I do a lot of thinking in advance. And then I work on a brilliant machine called a Vandercook proof press. And it is the guiding feature of my life. I basically choose where I live based on whether or not they have a public access letterpress. That's not an exaggeration at all. So this press allows me to print quite quickly and quite efficiently and very precisely. You know, there are printmakers who do this practice with lino, and they ink their lino with a roller, and then they place their paper on top of the lino, and then they rub it very carefully with a spoon or a baron or something on the back until they've made contact with the whole, I'm doing this, you can see, until they've made contact with the whole area, and then they lift it up. And then if they have to do another color, then they ink it carefully, and then they have to make sure to put it down in exactly the same spot. And it's just incredibly painstaking. And this machine that I use, I still have to feed every sheet of paper by hand, and there's a lot of very specific knowledge where I have to know how to lock up my matrix, or like the thing that I'm printing off of. So it could be lino or lead type or a polymer plate. I have to figure out how to place it on the press bed so that when the rollers go over it, it gets inked, and it gets inked evenly on one side and on the other side. And that when I turn the press, the page hits it in the right spot. But once I get it set up, I regularly print 100, 200 prints in a day.
Wow.
I think I did all 100 of this sheet. I did the blue and black in one day, and then I did the yellow and the light green another day. My record for most impressions in one day is 1,200, but I was not using any ink. It was just a blind embossing, and it was the same blind embossing on 1,200 sheets of paper. So it wasn't like I didn't have to set up again. I just turned the press 1,200 times.
So which project was that for?
That was for The Pink of the Seams. It's it's by Sana Wani. It's a poetry project. It was in this envelope. So it was a lot. It's a lot like yours in that there was a container and then there's loose sheets. But it was in this envelope, and the poems were all loose, and you could sort of like spread them out all over your bed and look at them in whatever order you wanted, or you could mail them to your friends and totally divide it up. I like book arts where the person who's reading it is invited to participate in some way. So I'll show you, this is this, in case that wasn't clear, in case people don't have as visual brains as I do, which probably is likely. When I layer all three of these things together and hold it up to a light source. So I was showing my brother this earlier today because I was very proud of the photography, and he's a photographer. and he's like, is the plexiglass part of the book? And I was like, no, it is not. Plexiglass is a prop in this case, just to hold the sheets together, because they, you can see when the sheets make contact, you can see through them a lot easily, and you can see all the colors. So the plexiglass is just holding them together. And you actually can see this quite clearly if you have two hands and no plexiglass. But I only had one hand because my other hand is holding the camera. And you can, can you see me when I'm talking right now? Yeah. Okay, so you can see my utilitarian manicure right now. I have one hand that's decorated to take pictures, and I have one hand that's like, can be used to shovel through layers of type in drawers and get scuffed up. So this is what being an artist is.
That's a great metaphor. That sums it up right there.
Yeah.
So I also wanted to ask you, I think we've talked about this briefly before, but the idea of layers and colors. Mm-hmm. You're very mathematically driven, but you mentioned some crazy algorithm about using 3 colors or 4 colors and being able to get almost an infinite number of colors from, just three tins of ink.
Oh, yes. So there's in printmaking, we use CMYK, same as you use in a digital print. Digital printers also use CMYK. It stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And you can hypothetically mix all of the colors with those inks. I sometimes mix from the original ink colors, and actually a lot of the time I mix from ink that I've saved from past projects. We're all about the recycling here. So the black actually of the gravestone is, it looked orange when it was on the press. It was like a dark orange color, but when I printed on top of the blue and orange, make black. Yeah, and I think the green was recycled from something else.
So do you have how you're going to create those colors in your mind before you start, or are you kind of open to those chance occurrences, those little serendipitous?
Definitely open to the chance occurrences. I do actually quite a bit of my color mixing directly on the press. So I mix on this surface on the left here, this granite. That's my mixing table in the studio. And I mix approximately the color that I want, and I put a little bit of it on the press. And then I turn on the motor and I lower the rollers and I let it like circulate for a bit, and it sort of comes up like as a slightly more translucent version of itself. And I do a test print, and then I check the color and I'm like, how close is this to what I was imagining? And then I kind of coaxed it closer by adding a little bit of ink, if I want it to be more opaque, then I might add more ink, or I might add white ink. Usually make something more opaque, doesn't make it lighter. It's really hard to make letterpress ink lighter after it's on the press. And you can always add ink, but you can't take ink away. So yeah, I'm constantly tweaking it. Or if I want it to be like a little warmer, I'll add like a tiny bit of yellow directly on the press. Or if I want it to be a little bit grayer, I'll add a little bit of the opposite color. Yeah, it's definitely more by intuition than by like
severe planning.
Formula.
Yeah. So I can't remember which writer or artist it was that said you never really finish anything, you just abandon it. So at what point do you think a project is finished? Or, is there some kind of deal you make with yourself? I'm going to work on this particular project for this amount of time, and then I'm moving on to the next.
Well, with book projects, I mostly execute them as planned, and however long that takes is however long I work. But I also do these individual prints that are reductions with many layers, where I could make one image, and so I carve and print, and then I carve a little bit more on the same block, and I print in a slightly different color, and I keep going for like 6 or 7 layers. And I actually have to really watch myself and keep from overworking it. You may have the same thing in writing. I don't know. I would love to hear about it. But I'll often plan 7 layers, and I'll execute 6 layers, and I'll go to put the 7th one on, and I'll take my test proof, and I'll be like, no, actually it doesn't need it. We're staying at 6. It's done.
So there is a bit of an organic process to the whole creation of a book. You plan it, but there is a time when you just know instinctively that it's done. And I think that's true for writing as well. I tend to be pretty brutal, and my litmus test for knowing if something is right is if I read it out loud. And then the rhythm and the necessity of a word or the need for a word becomes very apparent if you're reading it out loud. Mm-hmm. And I tend to be very very tough. I save things that I've written. I don't throw things away, but in terms of a project that I'm working on, in my Santa Rosa trilogy, for the first novel, when I started it, it was going to be a ghost story, not truly in the traditional sense of a ghost story, but this family of ghosts was going to inhabit this neighborhood that had disappeared. And I wrote a lot. I would say about 2/3 of the story, and realized that it just wasn't working, and it wasn't what I wanted. So I scrapped it and I just started over. I might still go back to that idea, but the 3 books that became what they did were nothing like what I originally started with. So I tend to be pretty ruthless. If it's not working, it's not working. I don't keep going. So
I find that in my creative practice, I will save an element or like a fragment of an idea that I might revisit, or I'll see it and I'll be like, that I'm going to use that for something in a little bit. Like I think the first time I had the idea to do like a folded 4-page thing that you had to like look all the way through was years ago. I didn't have like a really good reason to use it until now. And I think that you should have a good reason to use a structure, like it should be tied inextricably to the text. But I find that if I start an idea or a project and it loses me, I never return to that thing as a complete thing. Like I'm never gonna finish a thing that I stopped doing. I might like cannibalize it and use a piece of it over here and a piece of it over here, but I'm never gonna finish the thing the way that I originally intended to.
Yeah. But I mean, it's a case of not, going back to your idea of materials. It's a case of not wasting anything. I mean, I keep stuff. I might go back, I might squirrel it away and then go back to it later when I'm working on something else. That character might appear, or a certain, swath of dialogue or something like that might appear. Yeah, I don't throw away. I mean, I abandon for the moment, but yeah, I don't throw away.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm doing right now is I'm saving all of my paper scraps, and mostly that's like trimmings from different projects, but I'm planning on making paper at some point in the next 6 to 8 months. And it's one of those things where like every odd and end, every receipt, everything that may or may not be actually recyclable by the city is in my paper bin. And sometimes when I'm just like watching a movie at the end of the day, I sit there and I tear them into tiny pieces of paper. And in preparation for that thing that I don't know what it's going to look like, but at some point I'm going to make paper.
I have, and it's incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible experience. I love it. I think we're rounding the hour here. It's 8-ish.
Oh,
yeah. So did you want to share some other visuals of your projects, Brianna, or?
I could. I don't know if we invited this at any point, but Wendy and I are happy to answer any questions that anyone has. If you, are they able to unmute themselves?
Yeah. So if anyone wants to unmute themselves or type a question in chat, that's completely fine. I'll keep an eye on chat. If you wanted to, so far there's no questions. If you wanted to show a few pictures while we wait to see if anyone thinks of something.
Sure.
I got a greeting from Sarah. Hello, Sarah. And yeah, it's great to be in touch with you too.
Is that Sarah Norfolk?
Yeah.
Excellent.
It's been too long.
Mm-hmm. I will say, just while I'm looking at this photo, that even though it's a wooden box, this book looks more like a book than most of the books that I've made in the last few years.
The codex that wasn't supposed to be a codex.
Yeah, definitely.
It's beautiful.
But I like the idea of, I think part of making book arts is you have to know not only how someone is going to look at it, but how someone's going to keep it. If you have an artwork, then you intend for it to be framed, or you intend to be kept in a portfolio. And if you have a book, you intend it to be kept on a shelf. And so I like to sort of make things clear, if I can, to my collectors. Where do you put this in your collection? So this one, I'd say, definitely goes on your bookshelf.
Well, and that kind of segues to a question from Rebecca for recommendations for the care of your books when sent to the receiver.
Care. So I guess it depends on what your goal is as a collector. Is your goal to preserve it exactly in the state that it's in when you receive it, or is your goal to allow it to continue existing in time after that point? My partner is an artist who deals with architecture and buildings and cities, and he likes to talk about how a building is never a finished building. A building is just in a state of being, it's a building and then it's in a state of decay. There's no such thing as a finished building. And I kind of think that's an okay way to think about art and artist books as well. For example, the newsprint that the Obits poems are printed on is newsprint, the same as a newspaper. And so most of us have probably encountered a really old newspaper at some point in our lives. There's a shocking range of preservation. You know, a newspaper under floorboards, if it ended up staying dry, could be in pristine, perfect condition, look exactly the same as the day it was published. It's uncanny. But more often, newsprint yellows a little bit and it becomes like slightly more brittle. And I don't think that either of those options is right or wrong. I kind of think that both of those things add to the story.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the book is constantly evolving, right? And thanks, Rain, and thank you, Elaine, for your comments. Yeah, I think an artist's book. I mean, the traditional codex book. I mean, you know, if you read a novel in your 20s and then you read it again in your 30s, it's a different book. You read it in your 40s, it's a different book. You read it in your 50s, it's again a different book. So in a way, again, to go back to this idea of the artist book being a metaphor, the artist book is a metaphor for how we evolve as readers and as viewers of art. So in a way, it is in itself a perfect thing.
Yeah.
Were there any other questions?
There's apparently 5 things in the comments. What were, oh, I found them. No, I didn't. I just see a little number 5.
Oh.
There's just been a few comments
Okay.
saying what amazing work you've done. That's what Wendy was thanking them for. So one person says, just amazing work. I love what you've both done here. Another person says, beautiful job. Congratulations to you both.
Sorry, yes, I just can't find a way to view the chat while also screen sharing.
Yes, and thanks for your comments.
Wendy, there's another question that's come in.
Oh, how I have actually not held the book in my hand yet, Rebecca. I've only seen photos as Brianna has been working on this and she's been sharing with me. So every time she'd say, oh, okay, here, you know, I this is what I did today. And I look at the photograph and just gasp, especially when I saw what she had done with Avebury, the poem Avebury Cemetery. Incredible. And I remember when we first talked about her sourcing wood for the box, I kind of had in my mind what it was going to look like. And when she showed it to me and said it had been salvaged paneling, I was taken aback. It's just, it's exquisite. And I think, you know, how I felt was just extremely humbled and extremely flattered. And it was if I had seen the poems with fresh eyes and in a new way. So that's, for me, one of the most wonderful things about collaboration is that you experience your work through the interpretation of the musician or the artist that you're working with. And that, I think, for me, is truly inspiring.
I have this little list of rules for myself for good book arts, because it's not like painting or like, you know, commercial book design. There's no like set of rules about like, this is good, this is less good, this is successful, this is unsuccessful. So I made myself my own list. It's in the process of becoming a blog post, so you will be able to read it eventually. But one of my rules is that if you have 2 people working on a project, they should be saying similar things, but not the same thing. That an interpretation is more interesting than a direct translation.
Yeah, and I would agree. And I think, you know, going back to what something I said off the top, as a writer, you have to be willing to let go of your work and completely give it over to whoever you're working with. And I don't have a problem with that. I'm excited to see how someone else interprets my work. It's always a revelation for me.
Yeah, I think I'd be interested one way to go the opposite direction. I'd be interested to have a writer interpret an artwork that I make. Although it's very easy to be an artist when you already have like the main idea, or for me, it's easy to be an artist when you already have the main idea, that you're not like looking at a blank page and being like, what shall I draw today? I don't know. Maybe I won't draw today. Sorry, you were going to say something.
Well, I've written a lot about art, and writing about art is ekphrasis, which I love to do. And for me, the challenge is always not to simply describe the art, whether it be painting, sculpture, a print. The challenge for the writer is to literally become part of the artwork and then carry it further, and maybe even connect it back to your own life. Years ago, in my first book of poetry, over 20 years ago, I wrote a poem inspired by the wedding at Amalfi, which I know is supposedly an engagement photo, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, the title of it is Wedding at Amalfi. And what I did was take that painting, but posit the action, the narrative, in a working class neighborhood in Edmonton, and follow a working class couple through various life stages and through various scenarios. So I find it really interesting to respond to a work of art in ways other than mere description. And I think that's what, that's what you do in a sense with your response to poetry, to narrative.
It's funny, before you said that, I was thinking about how, especially when we're describing works in art history, the tendency is to like romanticize something that was not at all romantic. Mm-hmm. And that's also what I do. Is I typically work with writers who are dealing with like really heavy themes. My big themes that people I'm working with are talking about is grief, environmentalism, and mental health. Those are like the things that I'm pretty much always talking about when I'm working with a writer. And the things that I make are like really pretty and comforting. And I think that's my response. My response is to like romanticize, to make palatable these like big, heavy, painful things. Not to make light of them, but just to make it easier to look at them, and therefore easier to go somewhere with it, as opposed to just like ignoring it because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. We have another question from Sheila. One, will this gorgeous book be available for sale? And I'll let you field that one, Brianna. But she also makes a comment that the differences between redacted poems, Obits and Obits 2 years later, seems the Obits here tell us as much about the living as the dead, at least the times and the reality of the living. Very much so. It was almost uncanny for me to take a look at these two poems 2 years later. And I mean, in 2018, this poem was part of a little suite I was working on of found redacted poems from other sources as well. And I had no idea what we'd be looking at in 2020. So yes, that's a very good point. It does tell us as much about the living as the dead. And Brianna, I'll let you field the questions about the book being available for sale.
Just real quick on Obits, I think it also tells us about your frame of mind. Like it's not a objective survey. It's redacted poetry, and therefore you, the poet, also have a lens that is apparent. Like you were picking up the things that you thought were relevant, maybe not as much in Obits 1, but like in Obits 2 years later, I'm sure that your frame of mind and your awareness of the pandemic was really an important factor in the things that jumped out at you.
Oh, most definitely. Absolutely.
In terms of collecting this book, it's going on pre-order about 5 minutes after I get off of this call. I have to make it go live. It's going to be available on penrosepress.ca. If maybe, Wendy, would you be able to pop that into the chat, just the website, penrosepress.ca, in case somebody is struggling to find it? And I'll make it available in the announcement bar, which is like, as soon as you go to the website, it's the thing at the very, very top. So you don't have to go looking for it. And it's going to be on pre-order for just 1 week, which is a really short pre-order period. And the pre-order price will be 75 Canadian dollars. And then after the 1 week, it's going to be regular price 100. Yeah.
Okay, I've jotted that into the chat. And we have another question for you, Brianna. Rebecca's wondering what your mental process is when you are doing the pre-work for the project. What's going on in your brain? It seems that there would be so many avenues to start. How do you find an avenue that feels right for the project?
That is a really good question. I think part of the work of figuring out how to structure an artwork is done before the artwork, before the idea, in my case, the writing arrives in my inbox. You know, I'm thinking about styles and ways that I would like to work, and I'm thinking about structures that I want to include. I mentioned The Pink of the Seams by Sanawani earlier, and that was a project that the thing that brought it all together in my mind is I knew I wanted to do a button string closure on the envelope. That was the onus of the creative idea. And for Avebury, it was that I wanted to fold a sheet in 4 and have you hold it up to the sun and look through it, and everything else sort of came around that. I was like, it's going to be really fragile. I need to put it in something. How about a wooden box? Like that came after. But I also think that it's hard for me to identify my process because it's so all over the place. I was telling Wendy about this recently, that a friend of mine was telling me, she's like, Brianna, your Instagram is so beautiful, but I never know what you're working on because it's like a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And then there's this thing over here. And I'm like, what project is that for? And I'm like, oh, that's just the order that I work on things in. I'm not shuffling my Instagram on purpose. This is just the order that I'm working and I'm posting on a daily basis. So I've started like organizing things into projects more recently so that it's less confusing for people who aren't inside my head. But I'm really working on like all kinds of things all at once. And yeah, the creative ideas come from unexpected places. I will say that I keep, sometimes I'll have an idea, like the button string envelope was just like an idea in my head, and the way that I saved it for some future thing that I didn't know what it was going to be is I will find a photo of it on the internet and I will save it to a Pinterest board. I use Pinterest a lot.
There you go, social media.
Pinterest is, I'm going to sound like a webinar. Pinterest is actually not a social media. Oh. Pinterest is a search engine.
Boom.
Every webinar about Pinterest starts out with that line, I promise.
Oh, okay. Good to know. I've been told.
For anyone who doesn't know Wendy personally, Wendy is incredibly social media savvy. I'm always like, she's like using hashtags and casual texting, and I'm always like, what good ideas.
Yeah, usually sarcastically, right?
I mean.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah, Twitter's fun. Or, sorry, Insta's
No.
fun. Twitter's not fun.
Instagram's fun.
Yeah, Twitter not so much.
To each their own.
Yes. Are there any other questions? Don't be shy.
I haven't seen any come in. Brianna, if you don't mind, I'm just going to stop you sharing your screen
Oh, sure thing.
just to pull everything up. So yeah, if anyone has any questions before we sign off, I'll let them put it in there. I just want to say, well, thank you for one thing. This was amazing. One of the things we'd hoped to do was have this on display at the Stanley Milner Library. We were this close to setting it up when the notice came that we had to close down the public libraries again. So it's too bad. I was really looking forward to seeing it in person, but there will be a chance to see it soon. So that's good.
Yes. Yeah, I'm hoping that we'll be able to do something physically at the library at some point.
That would be lovely.
I also, again, all of the scheduling for 2021 is soon, 1 month to 6 months away. But I do have a show at some point, or a piece of a show at some point at SNAP in the future, in which this will definitely be a part. I was the emerging artist in residence at SNAP in 2019.
Yeah, and I think that's where I first saw your work, and I just loved it.
Yeah, and so I installed in their new window space. But part of the residency is that you're like promised like a show in the gallery, and they're like, yeah, you'll still get that at some point when we're allowed to have shows in the gallery. So it's a really wonderful space to work out of.
Yes, I was saying to Wendy actually before you came on, Brianna, with our makerspace down in the new Stanley Milner Library, I would love to sort of find a way to tie you into that. I'm sure there's lots of things you could work with in there and teach people about.
I remember in one of my very early visits, it was actually before the library was renovated and moved. I noticed that you guys have a Cricut.
Yep.
Yep. And for anybody who's unfamiliar, a Cricut is it's like a cutting machine. It's not a laser. It's a tiny blade.
Yep.
A vinyl cutter. It cuts other things that are not vinyl.
We do have vinyl cutters as well, like separate vinyl cutters. But yes, we do have Cricuts.
What I think is funny about that, and I guess people don't always think about this. When you think about an artist, you think about a painter, you think about a sculptor, right? You may think about a printmaker, depending on who you are. But one of the artists that I have worked with and worked as an assistant to used a Cricut as like the #1 tool for her practice. And so, yeah, there's a lot of cool things that you can do with unexpected materials. This is the moral of the story.
Well, and Rain just commented, oh my God, they have a Cricut? Well then.
I have a Cricut.
We have a Cricut. We have a few. A few different branches have them. Actually, my branch got one this past year. Unfortunately, we haven't been open to the public for them to use it since we got it. But it's been exciting learning how to use it and all the things. The downtown makerspace though has that and more. When we can open to the public fully, there'll be things like bookbinding that you can do in there, which I'm the most excited about. But there's also like wood laser cutters, the 3D printers, all those kind of things. So really neat, different ways of creating. Yeah, so there's been a few more. Oh, sorry.
I feel like you also have like a board game collection. That's
yes. Yeah, we have everything. The library's amazing.
We love libraries.
Thank you. We love you. There's been a few more comments come in, just thank you. So thank you, ladies. I always love listening to other artist processes, especially collaboratives. So yeah, this has been an amazing, amazing talk. As I said, I did record it. I know some people came in a bit late. So this recording hopefully will go up in the next little while on YouTube, and I'll send the link out to everyone who joined us as well, so that you have a chance to look at this again if you want to. Yeah, if there's nothing else, any final words, Wendy or Brianna?
Just thank you very much, EPL. Thank you, Capital City Press. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Brianna. And thanks to everyone who joined us tonight. This has just been an incredible project for me, very inspiring, and it's been great to work with Brianna.
Likewise. Yeah, I can't wait to bring you a physical copy so that we can hang out while masked outside and I can see you look at it for the first time. That'll be a fun
Oh, you
Oh,
should
I'm
record
looking
that.
forward to it.
thing.
Very much looking forward to it.
Right. Thank you everyone so much. Have a wonderful evening. Stay safe
Thanks
out there.
so much.
See ya.
Bye.